They are not going to be mixed because the mobile unit is set up airside. It's airside. Where the nurses' station is, there is a door from the ramp straight to the nurses' station. Okay, so there will be no mixing with the general population of the airport or anyone in the airport except the nurses, and they will be well equipped with their PPEs to handle such cases.
Once a passenger of interest is identified, they do not enter the regular route to clear the regular landing procedure. All right, they are routed to that alternative route where they are screened by the medical personnel. They clear their immigration procedures there, and if they need to be quarantined or isolated, they do not re-enter the general population. They are moved directly from there onto their final destination.
In the event a passenger exhibits symptoms on a flight, Ramkelawan says they will have prior discussions with the pilot through the airline to determine the best course of action.
Now, if there is a person sitting, let's say, in seat 12C and is displaying symptoms and would have had the travel history, what we would do from an epidemiological standpoint, the process is we would quarantine persons 3 rows forward, so up to 15, and 3 rows backward. So from 9 to 15, right, and to the sides also. Those persons would be direct contacts. So they would be removed and bring here to process. If they are staying off in Grenada, they will all be quarantined. If there is onward travel to any other island, there is a network that has been set up between the CMOs within the region, the chief medical officers. I would channel that information to our CMO, who would then indicate his peers within the other regional countries. And upon arrival, those persons would be, because it would be citizens, they would be quarantined. Once they are not displaying symptoms, they would have been exposed, but not displaying symptoms, so there would be no immediate concern. All right? But the others, the rest of the flight, we would still give them this card just in case, who are staying off.
But what happens if someone actually tests positive for the virus?
If we have prior information that that person tests positive, then the processes would change at the port of entry. The way we take them off the plane, what we do with them. We're going to take them in a different line, as we said, manage their luggage, manage their immigration purposes, triage them, put them in isolation at the airport itself. And then we will not put them into quarantine. That person will be transferred to the isolation unit at the general hospital. And there they will be treated. At that treatment site, the healthcare providers will wear full PPEs, right, just like you see in China and other places. And we do have those PPEs on island. And of course, the symptoms will be managed until they're well enough.
The process is similar for those arriving on private flights. Grenadian student Wesley McKee, who recently returned from China, can attest to the measures in place by all those involved in the process. GIS spoke with McKee following his mandatory 14-day quarantine period, having returned home from China. He is pleased with the efforts of all involved to ensure that Grenada remains safe.
Quarantine is definitely necessary. There's no question about it. There's nowhere to build up to that. It's just a point to be made. It is definitely necessary. Even though the person may not be infected, they come from a place where there's the possibility. So quarantine is definitely a necessity. So that has to happen for safety purposes. It's a procedure that is necessary. For safety purposes, it's a procedure that is necessary. I'm going to put that out there. Use that word again, necessary.
Diplomats visiting Grenada have also commended the actions being taken at the ports of entry to help prevent the introduction of the novel coronavirus to the country. The diplomats detailed the screening process they went through on arrival at the Maurice Bishop International Airport and commended the frontline staff for maintaining established procedures irrespective of the stature of the visitor. While it might not have been mandatory in the past to fill out the section of the immigration form that requires one's travel history in the last 6 weeks, it is now a requirement of all passengers. And just as stringent protective and preparatory measures are in place at the MBIA, so too is Grenada's port that welcomes cruise ships. Kenneth Hazard, Port Environmental Health Officer assigned to cruise and cargo ships, explained to the Government Information Service that the ship's agent sends the Maritime Declaration of Health, the document that declares the state of health on board the ship, to the Ministry of Health, Port Environmental Health Officer, the Chief Environmental Health Officer, and the Chief Medical Officer via email. The declaration outlines pertinent information of passengers and crew, including their names and nationalities.
Once we see persons from China at this time, we do a little more probing to determine the travel history of that person. Once we determine that that person would have been in China within the last 14 days, which really is the maximum incubation period that we know now for the virus, then we would have to do some more investigation as to whether or not that person becomes a threat to us, and we would ask that that person does not disembark the ship. However, if that person, like for example, I can give an example this morning where we have a number of crew members. In fact, we had, I think, 2 passengers who were of Chinese nationalities. And those persons reside in America. The passengers reside in the United States. The crew members would have been on board since October last year. So
the boarding party, which includes the Ministry of Health, Customs and Port Health officials, will board the ship to verify the documentation received.
The captain of the ship is obligated through the international health regulation to declare any conditions on board that ship that may result in a threat to the country in which the ship is visiting. So any matter of infectious nature or disease of an infectious nature must be declared under that document. That document would be reviewed by the Port Environmental Health Officer, and a decision is made out of that. Mm-hmm. We also review the ship's itinerary, the last 10 ports that the ship would have called at. That would give us an indication as to whether that ship would have passed through one of the infected areas. And out of that, we would also base our decision.
Hazard says they are satisfied that they're doing all they can to protect Grenada.
We don't allow any ship in that is not visited by an environmental health officer. And the officers are now very much on the lookout for anything that would pose a risk to our nation. And once this is identified, we have a responsibility for us to contact our CMO, our Chief Environmental Health Officer, and our CMO, who can then make a determination as to whether or not we can allow such ship to come into the country. I think there are enough measures in place to help us to more or less keep it outside of our doors. Or if it were to come in, maybe a case or 2 be imported, I think we have measures in place to really manage and to prevent further spread. As you know, we have a mandatory quarantine for persons coming directly out of China, and these persons are monitored within the incubation period to ensure that they do not come up with the symptoms of the disease. And if they do, then the necessary treatment would be taking place and to prevent any further spread. So I believe that we are doing a lot. We are doing what is necessary. I'm not saying that we have all the capacities to maybe even take care of an outbreak. However, we're doing what is necessary now to prevent any outbreak.
Back at the Morris Bishop International Airport, staff is updated regularly to ensure that all are on the same page and are aware of what is expected of them. During a visit there by the GIS, staff were engaged in an education session conducted by epidemiologist Dr. Sean Charles. With surveillance at all ports of entry, he says they need to ensure that all protocols are adhered to.
We also actively seek passengers of interest, passengers who would have been in China or in any region where the disease would be potentially exposed. All right, and we have set up procedures here to process those individuals. Once we verify their travel history and their potential exposure, then we know what we're doing. And in addition, we are also looking for symptoms. If there are any, then we have procedures for dealing with either case, all right? Meaning either quarantining the person or putting them into isolation.
Ms. Kim McQuilkin, Health and Safety Manager at the MBIA, says a common theme in their sensitization sessions is attention to personal hygiene. And to help employees ensure this, the Airports Authority has mounted sanitation stations outside most of the public restrooms.
So even after washing your hands with soap and water, then you have the option of sanitizing your hands. We've also placed posters in strategic areas in order to inform the public and our workers to continue to protect themselves by washing their hands and to reduce the risk of contamination.
More attention is also being paid to ensuring that contact surfaces remain as germ-free as possible.
The janitors at the airport have also increased the frequency at which they clean and sanitize contact surfaces. And this will limit the transmission of the virus.
Over in Carriacou, Minister for Carriacou and Petite Martinique Affairs, the Honourable Kindra Mathurin-Stewart, said Carriacou is formulating a preparedness plan to ensure the safety and well-being of its residents. She said facilities in Carriacou have been retrofitted to accommodate isolation and quarantine units. During her first quarterly press briefing for 2020, Minister Mathurin-Stewart also said work is being done on facilities in Petite Martinique for the same purpose.
Since early January of this year, in my capacity, I convened and held many meetings, with the most recent one being yesterday, with our health professionals, representatives from Port, Airport, Immigration and Customs Department, the police, the marina, among other key stakeholders in this regard. And since early January, even before the assessment risk were upgraded, we in Carriacou were able to identify facilities and buildings to be used for quarantine and for isolation purposes, should the need so arise. Immediately after those meetings, the Ministry of Carriacou and Petite Martinique Affairs effected the required repairs and renovations to the buildings and facilities that were identified, making them now fit and ready for the intended purpose.
In the meantime, Grenadians are being told they have a moral responsibility to protect themselves. Dr. Sean Charles, head of the Ministry of Health's Epidemiological and Surveillance Units, says there are some simple measures that can be employed.
Hand hygiene, cough etiquette. Don't cough or sneeze into the air. Wash your hands. Avoid persons who are sick. Seek medical attention if necessary. Teach your children, healthy practices so that they avoid diseases. Because as Dr. Martin said, for these viruses, there is no treatment. There is no vaccine that has been developed yet. Prevention is the best option. The Ministry of Health will do all that it needs to ensure the health of everyone. But we would need the assistance of the public and of the media in spreading the word that it's simple. It goes back to simple preventive measures, public health measures that will need to be instituted to reduce the impact of this disease.
The Ministry of Health has activated two 24-hour COVID-19 helplines with the assistance of telecommunication services providers Digicel and Flow. The two helplines, 45-VIRUS or 458-4787 and 53-VIRUS 538-4787, are zero-rated to customers who subscribe to the respective service providers. I am Leslie Ann Johnson. Thank you so much for viewing.
COVID-19 response coordinator Dr. George Mitchell says the 10 samples sent to the Caribbean Public Health Agency CARPHA for testing for the coronavirus have returned negative. Dr. George Mitchell has been providing regular updates to the nation on the virus, sharing tips on how families can implement their preparedness plans and how the elderly and children can be protected.
Those 10 samples were sent down to CARPHA, which is the regional lab that we're using in Trinidad that most islands are using. And of the samples that we've sent, all of them, and I repeat, all 10 of them came back negative. I was on the phone with the director of the lab up until about 12 o'clock on Saturday night, and I was happy to get those results, which I immediately passed on to the minister and the executive team.
Dr. Mitchell highlighted the details of the case.
Since before she came here, went to see her GP in the UK, was treated with some antibiotics, felt better to take the flight, came here, and when she got here, she sort of like started feeling a bit unwell again. She accompanied her husband, so she was not one of the players. She accompanied her husband to that game, sat by herself, as far as we know, in the pavilion. There, she was not actively demonstrating any signs of symptoms. She was not coughing, she was not sneezing, or anything where she would have been able to sort of like pass on the virus. And that happened on the 1st. She went back to the hotel after the game and did not go out after that based on the information we have. So it is interesting to note, Leslie, and that particular patient did not even pass the virus to her husband, who she lived with and would have been in the most maybe proximal, contact with her. And they've tested the rest of passengers as well. And as far as we know, and as far as we're concerned, none of them who are on the party have tested positive.
The COVID-19 coordinator says the Ministry of Health is currently doing contact tracing to find anyone who may have been in close proximity or direct contact with the individual, so they too can be tested.
Our team on the ground went to Radisson on Saturday and do as a thorough contact tracing as we can possibly do. And so persons have been followed up and are being checked to ensure that that person did not infect anybody here.
Another batch is ready to serve with the Royal Grenada Police Force. On Friday, the passing out ceremony of recruit course number 44 was held at Camp Saline. The graduating group consists of 56 officers and is recognized as the second largest group of the training school since 1994.
26 weeks ago, on the 23rd of September 2019, I had the distinct pleasure of welcoming recruit post number 44 into the walls and environs of the Police Training School to commence the revolutionary, transformative process in becoming RGPF compliant officers. Yet again, 60 successful candidates commenced that process. They were filled with intuitive apprehension, having heard the varying stories of what to expect. Unfortunately, only 56 were able to successfully navigate the labyrinth and convolution of the training syllabus.
Acting Commissioner of Police, Mr. Edwin Martin, urges the graduates to uphold the values of their occupation as they strive toward combating crime in Grenada.
Graduates, from this day, you will be role models to society and gatekeepers of criminal justice. Every action you take in your personal and professional life will be the subject of intense public scrutiny. There will be times throughout your career that you will be faced with situations to make critical decisions that can either generate the desired results or unintended consequences. Remember, each of those decisions, whether right or wrong, will in part become part of your legacy. You are going to be challenged. You will be tempted, and you will find yourselves in difficult situations. However, I admonish you to always do the right thing.
Feature address speaker, Solicitor General Ms. Dia Forrester, had some words of advice for the graduates.
Do what you have to do so you can do what you want to do. When you do those things, you have to be conscious of your duty. You have to be conscious that the reputation that you build and the character you display will define you. Your reputation is what others think of you, and your character is who you are. Preserve and guard both faithfully throughout your professional life as an officer. Insubordination is not acceptable, but neither is victimization. Neither must feature when you serve.
The Special and Inclusive Education Draft Policy was the subject of a recent stakeholder consultation, which focused on ways in which the policy can create improved access and opportunities for students with special needs. We get more in this Annette Moore report.
Every child can succeed. Every child is valuable, and we ought to demonstrate that.
Nothing about us without us. You must include them so that they will feel part of society.
I am very happy that the ministry is taking this approach, which means that we are more aware, we're more conscious, and we're willing to give them the sort of education that they would need to help them to be independent.
The Special and Inclusive Needs Education Draft Policy is intended to create more equitable access. John, a member of the Special Education Unit at the Ministry of Education, tells us more.
We looked at accommodation, we looked at financing, we looked at what is expected from our general stakeholders as well as from the Ministry of Education, parental involvement, and our corporate citizens. It's just like how everybody can come together to ensure that we accommodate persons with special needs. In terms of transitioning from the school to the world of work and ensuring that persons with special needs are given some sort of, maybe not priority, but they are given consideration as it relates to finding employment. We have to concentrate on a lot of data gathering, and that is an area that we really need to do a lot of work in.
I'm extremely happy with the work that the ministry is currently doing as it relates to a policy for special education, inclusive education. We value this very much, and while the ministry at this time is undertaking to bring to completion about 9 different policies, a total of 20 for this year, but about 9 for this first quarter. I'm singling out special education, inclusive education, because of the fact that we are making a tremendous effort to ensure that every child has an equal opportunity as it relates to education in Grenada.
Several stakeholders at the draft policy consultation told us what they think the current challenges are for people with special needs, what they liked about the policy, and their expectations for its future implementation. Jared Kajo is a parent of a special needs student and the principal of the Samaritan Presbyterian School in St. Mark, which serves students with special needs.
There are so many challenges. We have access to educational services, just like the other regular students would have. But because they have special needs, there might be a challenge. So we're looking at the physical infrastructure. That is an issue. Ramps and so on, to ensure that those who have physical disability can get to classes and so on and so forth. When they have finished school, what happens when they have to go out to work? They become adults. They have to access public buildings too. So all these are part of the legislation that we will see happen, and we're very happy about it.
Whatever we are doing as it relates to repairs, construction of new facilities, we want to make sure that they're more suitable for persons with challenges. And of course, the cost goes up with that, but we have to ensure that we move in that direction.
We have discussed the plans to have classes equipped with more equipment, to address the needs, like the FM system, the hearing aids, and all that.
We want to reach that place where every child can be screened, not just for hearing challenges, but speech impediments and so on. How do we detect that very early in the stage of that child, before that child even enters school? We've been partnering through the Ministry of Health with the Starkey Foundation, and you notice a number of our students with hearing issues. We have benefited significantly from that. A number of our students got free hearing aids through that program.
The human resource at the school too, training of teachers or persons to assist, or the availability or lack of availability of assistant teachers, which is critical, I think, in assisting, especially if we want these students to be assimilated into the mainstream.
We are focusing on training. So right now we've just invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in a group of teachers who are now at St. George's University doing a first degree fully funded by the government of Grenada. And that first degree in psychology has a focus in special education.
Founding member of the Grenada Down Syndrome Association and parent to a special needs child, Alison Miller, shared her thoughts on special needs and the draft policy.
I like to focus on the parents a bit. We need to do education. We need to find employment for some of them. We need to be able to allow them to move from one level to the next so they could take care of their children with special needs. We need to do a lot of public awareness and education because a lot of people still don't understand people and children with special needs.
A representative from the Grenada Council for the Disabled also shared her views.
We have done a lot of work, all the agencies, stakeholders and so, but we have a lot more to do where we have to make them aware as to how they should treat persons with disabilities. I love the part of the children when they finish school. They should be trained and be employed just as anybody once they're employable. And I think we have to change the mindset.
afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this special press briefing of the Ministry of Health. My name is Leslie Ann Johnson. Thank you so much for being here with us. To my immediate left, the Minister for Health, the Honorable Nicholas Steele. To his left, the Acting Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Francis Martin. And to his left, Dr. George Mitchell, the COVID-19 Response Coordinator. And of course, we're talking COVID-19. I'll hand over to you, Minister for Health.
Thank you and good afternoon to you all, brothers and sisters and members of the media who are here and all of those who are listening or looking on through the length and breadth of Grenada or wherever else. Over the past months and most definitely in the last several weeks, the Ministry of Health has been working assiduously to hopefully or at best prevent the introduction of COVID-19 onto our shores. But however, we also were realistic in that those efforts were meant to delay any possible introduction in order to give us time, precious time to prepare, precious time to plan, and precious time to be able to deal with what, as every other country in the world is beginning to realize, is the inevitable introduction. So, I announce that today, Sunday, March 22nd, 2020, the first laboratory confirmed case of COVID-19 in Grenada was diagnosed. Officials of the Ministry of Health are now aggressively conducting contact tracing. This is an imported case, and the patient is now in isolation to prevent the potential spread of the disease. She arrived in Grenada from the United Kingdom on March the 16th. She became symptomatic on March the 17th and was subsequently tested. I assure you that our very capable medical team have been actively following up and engaging in contact tracing. We are already moving to isolate and monitor several other individuals who were in close contact with the patient. This will continue for the next 14 days at minimum. The patient is exhibiting mild symptoms, so we are encouraged, but we are not complacent. In keeping with standard protocol, the Ministry of Health has reported this confirmation of our first case to the World Health Organization and to the Pan American Health Organization. As the state of Grenada continues to aggressively monitor its ports and implement additional stringent methods to further protect our nation, the general public is urged to follow the safety advice and guidance of the Ministry of Health, practice proper hygiene, and maintain social distancing of at least 6 feet. The public is also advised to report or inform the Ministry of Health or nearest health facility of any possible or suspected persons displaying acute respiratory symptoms at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to a new phase, a phase of making sure that this deadly disease does not spread within our shores. It is here. We have the confirmation. And therefore, I implore you that we need to maintain the social distancing, but we must have the discipline as well to do it. We are aware of individuals in our society who do not have the discipline to date to maintain the social distancing. And these irresponsible individuals are putting the rest of us at risk. As such, the ministry and the government, in conjunction with the police, RGPF, will be taking the necessary actions as we move forward to ensure as best as possible that social distancing is maintained by all who are here in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. So we still have, as I mentioned, we have the Acting Chief Medical Officer, Dr. George Mitchell, and of course the COVID-19 Response Coordinator, that's Dr. Francis Martin, sorry, and the COVID-19, I'm mixing up my names, and the COVID-19 Response Coordinator, Dr. George Mitchell with us. Gentlemen, you care to make a statement?
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson, and good afternoon to our listening public, citizens all, and those who are also listening internationally. We were in our importation and isolation and community transmission phase for quite a while. We have now gotten our official imported case, and as such, we are in full gear for community transmission, or in other words, to avoid community transmission. It is in this regard I make a plea to our citizens that to avoid community transmission is very simple. You avoid being in contact and within 6 feet of people. In other words, we want to encourage social distancing. I am aware, I have received numerous reports of families who are still congregating, persons who are still having sessions, as we call it. I am strongly advising against it. I'm strongly advising against social gatherings. I was told that guys get by the bars sometimes, under a tent, around the barbecue stand, and just having fun. Colleagues, these are not simple times. And as a nation, we must understand that this is not simple times. Community transmission must be stopped at all cost. I want to remind you that the World Health Organization, through the epidemiological studies, have shown that on average, one symptomatic person can pass this on to 2.6 persons. And after about 10 generations of passing this on to persons, if there is 10 generations of passing it on, over a period of 5 to 6 days, countries can see up to 3,500 persons becoming infected with this virus. These are very, very frightening numbers. I implore on all our citizens, this is the time to be your brother's keeper. This is a time for you, if you see your neighbors or you see someone that is behaving in a reckless manner that can spread this virus, I recommend that you speak to them and help us in the process. We hope that the legal arm would also help us during that problem. Our COVID coordinator, Dr. Mitchell, will continue to lead the fight and lead the activities going forward. But there's only so much he can do. We as a nation do have a responsibility to stop community transmission at this point.
Just to say before we hand over to questions, as a result of us finding our first case in Grenada, it does give the Sanitary Authority, the Minister of Health, and the CMO, Chief Medical Officer, and Dr. George Mitchell, additional powers and strength which we intend to exercise to the fullest wherever necessary in order to protect our citizens of Grenada.
Thank you, Minister and Dr. Francis Martin. So we will now accept questions.
Minister.
As part of the protocol, which is normally, and you will see with most other nations, normally implemented when you have your first case, we started implementing that protocol regardless approximately a week and a half ago, which is a gradual shutdown. The schools closing, the requesting of the private sector, of the minimizing of individuals coming to work, only necessary people wherever possible, and if people can work from home, to allow them to do that. The travel restrictions, continued and increased travel restrictions, to the point where when it becomes obvious that the rest of the world, if other countries have been as lucky as we have been to have found that while up until yesterday we did not have a case, almost every other country in the world did. So at that point, the next step, whether you have a case or not, would be to shut your port to passengers, your airport. So we implemented that yesterday. It was a very timely decision. It was obviously the right decision, because today I am here facing the nation to say that we had our first imported case. And according to the protocol, it would be only today that we should be announcing and putting those measures in place and giving people further notice in order for it to happen. Thankfully, we had the foresight and the strength to, in this instance, vary from the protocol as over an abundance of caution. And as such, I do believe that we are staying slightly ahead in keeping our citizens as safe as possible. What's up next to the exemption for Wednesday? The exemption for Wednesday is simply because at this point in time, as a Minister of Health, dealing with an imminent crisis, having your first import, I want to get as many people as possible off the island. We do have foreign nationals here, and we want to ensure that our foreign nationals get off the island. There are still some tourists here. There are still some other foreign nationals here who desire to get off, and therefore will be less of a burden on this state, a medical burden on this state, should they be widespread. And then also on the other side, we may have, as we have seen in some of the flights, we have seen maybe 10 or 20 on each flight coming forward, Grenadians who live here and are coming home here to ride this storm out. So it is possible that British Airways will also bring individuals who are Grenadians who are choosing to come home at the last flight or this last flight. Just to say, to preempt what I would think would be your next question, the treatment of those individuals coming home with respect to quarantine would be very different. Because we now have, as I said, because we now have officially the first scientifically proven case, although I've been saying it's there but we haven't found it. We now have the first scientific proven case, so we now have the strength and the ability to act with a higher level of authority with respect to quarantine, etc. The request from, or the allowing of that British Airways flight, when we made the decision, that was the only flight that we had confirmation of that was taking people off island, that had said they are coming to this date, and had informed individuals who they had flown in here previously in the last couple of days, weeks, months, that is their last flight, and they actively contacted all of their individuals and also told us this would be their last flight. The other airlines up until then had said they would keep flying until it was either not possible from their home ports or not possible because we had closed. So that is why that British Airways flight is being allowed to take individuals off, whereas with all the others, they had simply said, we will remain flying as long as you remain open. So as far as we are concerned, because we have closed as of midnight on Monday, then all of the others are and expect to immediately stop flying as well.
As in regards to our confirmed case, can you give us some further information, travel history, and if, I know you can't disclose the identity of the individual, but to tell us basically on information you have now, is it a mild case or?
Yes, the individual so far, the patient is exhibiting mild symptoms. So far, mild symptoms. The individual did travel in to the state on the 16th of March, as I said, and also started displaying those symptoms on the 17th, was tested on the 19th. We got the test results back close to midnight last night. Now, with respect to travel, in order to assist, in my hand here, I've just taken away from the individuals that we were using for contact tracing. Here is the entire manifest list of the flight the individual came in on, and all of the individuals, including the seating arrangement. That is part of our contact tracing that we are currently involved in. The seating arrangement in order to contact any of those who sat next to the individual within a certain radius. That is a standard. The individual, according to our investigation, was not displaying symptoms when they were on the flight, but we are still making sure that the necessary protocols are followed in terms of contact tracing for individuals who were on that flight.
Minister, let me just ask quickly, as you mentioned about the contact tracing, how soon will we have any information as to what might be the status with anybody else that you would have had to interview?
With respect to contact tracing, but I allow the doctors to confirm or to add to it, anyone that we believe may have been in contact with that individual, we are getting in touch with if we have not already gotten in touch with, and have under strict surveillance and quarantine. Now, it is only if any of those individuals develop symptoms that we can go further to test. But after maybe midway into their quarantine period, i.e. between now and the next 7 days, we probably would test those individuals anyway, whether they are showing symptoms or not, just to be sure. But for now, only the individuals that were in contact that display symptoms would be tested, because as far as we're concerned right now, anyone that was in contact with them is a risk or has a risk of being infected, and therefore they're being strictly quarantined and observed. Doctors Martin or George?
Good morning to the media. Good morning to everyone listening everywhere. Minister, you're correct. That is the protocol we're going to follow. We just would like to put an alert all those folks, and if you're listening as well and you have been or think that you may be exhibiting symptoms, to call our hotline, and we will have our folks interview you, check you, so that you're okay. At least you're comfortable. So that is the protocol we are going to be following. Dr. Sean is our guru where that is concerned, and we expect, together with the folks at SGU, that we will do this as thoroughly as it's humanly possible.
Dr. Martin, can you explain so that people will be able to differentiate when we say mild symptoms, what exactly are we talking about here?
For the symptomatology of COVID, mild means fever, sore throat, possibly coughing or sneezing. There is some evidence, the science is still building, but we have to start talking about it early, because we have always been proactive in this response. There's some evidence that there is gastrointestinal symptoms associated with it as well. So although when the science just came out, it was about fever, sore throat, coughing and sneezing, we can now add at the bottom mild gastrointestinal symptoms as well. And gastrointestinal means vomiting and diarrhea.
Someone is asking, my apologies, if LIAT is still flying based on the last advisory that we were sent out, if LIAT is still flying because they're seeing information showing that flights are still available.
There are limited flights on LIAT right now. For instance, LIAT has already canceled the flights between Grenada and Trinidad, because Trinidad had closed its ports once it had its first series of imports. We have announced as of Monday night, midnight, so we would expect the airlines on their own to begin their decrease, and if not complete cessation of flights by Monday midnight.
Dr. Martin, I have a question here. Can someone be a healthy carrier of COVID-19?
Healthy carriers are normal in virology. There are a lot of people who can carry a virus without displaying any symptoms, and you call these people healthy carriers. Let me preempt what the next question might be. Can healthy carriers spread the virus? I know this has been on people's mind for quite a while. Again, the science is very, very limited on that. The science seems to suggest that the highest infective stage is the early mild symptomatic stages of the virus. As I indicated, the World Health Organization's report suggests and indicates that the transmissibility of the virus happens between the fifth and sixth days of approximately 5 and 6 days of symptoms, and that's the highest. And so take that in mind as we science develop. We're going to change, of course, we change our approach depending on how the science develops.
Is any family member of the confirmed case showing any symptoms or have been tested as a result?
The family members, or I probably shouldn't say family members, but the close contacts of the of our index case or zero case also has mild symptoms, doing very, very well. Through our contact tracing procedures over the next couple of days, we're going to decide on when to test and who to test, because as a matter of natural medical thinking, if there's close contact, one person has the case, you have to assume that the others are positive as well. So we're going to watch that situation and deal with it as it develops. We do have the capacity to test based on our index case. We checked yesterday with our epidemiologist, and we're satisfied that we have the ability to test our immediate requirements for testing. What's going to determine and what is going to affect our ability to test is community transmission. I really need to enforce this and reinforce this as a nation, as a people. Let us avoid having to deal with a situation where we need widespread community testing. I really hope we do not reach that stage, and we could only stay away from that stage based on the efforts of our people, the efforts of our citizens to avoid social gatherings and to take the precautions that we've been preaching. Wash your hands with soap and water, use hand sanitizer, avoid being in 6 feet of other persons, be careful with what you do, wipe your door handles. If our citizens follow this, we will never reach to a stage where we need to do widespread testing, because we will never reach to a stage where we have widespread community transmission. Citizens, we need to stop widespread community transmission so that we don't have the need for widespread testing.
The capacity historically in Grenada over the last 2, 3, 4 decades has been somewhere between 4 and a best of 5 ventilators total. We received 4 additional ventilators, so we now have physically on island 8, and we have between now and Monday already confirmed in possession somewhere between another 10 to, and I'm still hoping to bring that up to an additional 20 ventilators, which would basically, with the 4 ventilators that we had, we are close in terms of ratio of per capita to ventilators than any of the first world nations. But if you add the additional 15 that we're expecting, it brings us way up and a greater capacity per population than most of the other first world nations. I do hope that we don't need to use all of those 15 ventilators. This would be for the most serious cases. And the one way that we can make sure that quite possibly doesn't happen is to stop the irresponsible behavior. There are individuals out there who are Grenadian, who speak English, who can hear, who can see, and who know. They have not been living under a rock for the past 3 months. There are individuals out there who are very much aware that this is a global pandemic. There are individuals out there who have heard us say they should be quarantined. And most definitely, there are individuals, all individuals have heard us say, maintain the social distancing. But there are still people out there who choose to ignore it and somehow think that either 1, that they are superheroes and they can't get it, or 2, don't care enough about the rest of us and choose to continue their activities and put the rest of us in danger. That, I'm not saying that has to stop, that will stop as of now. With the Ministry of Health and we as a people. Like any other society, you cannot prevent an individual committing a crime, but there are measures in place for when someone commits a crime and they are caught. It is now, based on the authority of the sanitary, based on the authority that the sanitary authority has, it is now seen as a crime. It is now a crime to disobey the instructions of the CMO and the sanitary authority, i.e. Dr. George Mitchell and the Minister of Health and the Ministry of Health personnel, which is a criminal offense and also gives us the authority to forcefully quarantine anyone out there that is carrying out irresponsible behavior, which is whether you are an individual on your own, not maintaining the social distancing, whether you are the owner of a private business that is allowing activities to continue on your property that is not maintaining the social distancing, or whether you are a group of individuals who decide to celebrate or continue to celebrate whatever occasion it is, and you don't maintain the social distancing. Any and all of you are, one, terribly irresponsible, putting the rest of us at risk, have no excuse, and as such will be dealt with accordingly, if not by us in the Ministry of Health and Police and the law, but by our own people who will never forget you if you too are part of the cause of possible community spread in Grenada.
Can you share with us how many people are having symptoms that would have come into contact with that confirmed case? And secondly, I want to know regarding the travel history of that person. Did that person, can you tell us where the person originated from? Did they come in a direct flight, etc.?
This index case was a direct flight from the United Kingdom. So far, fortunately, the individual was advised on the airport that they should self-quarantine because understanding the risk. The information we have so far, the individuals were very cooperative. The individual may have been in close contact with between 3 to 5 persons. They have all been contacted. There was very good cooperation between the individual's physicians and us. And so we're going to continue to monitor that situation on a daily basis and deal with the outcome as we see going forward.
There's small buses with 1 million people in it. When are we shutting that down?
It's a difficulty because of each country is unique. While the disease is common, or the disease threat is common to all, each country is unique with respect to their cultural and other peculiarities. In Grenada, we have a transportation system that transports our public that is owned by individuals, i.e. that it is a private entity. In our discussions with individuals and in our efforts recognizing that quaint peculiarity, but still recognizing that being an area of threat, that is why one of the first steps we took a week and some ago was to announce the closing of schools, to reduce that level of individuals who are being transported, and also at that same time to begin asking the private sector and government itself to work to those who can work at home, and also work to only essential personnel, or as minimum as possible, and also started saying directly to the very bus owners, and I must say many of them have been making every effort possible to comply, to maintain the social distancing, which obviously means that you cannot take a full load or should not take a full load. Now, moving forward, we would expect them to also, and like I said, you will very quickly see now new measures which, whether or not we find community spread for us in the same way that we have been moving forward with certain things, the closing of schools and the closing of borders, even before we got what was a prescribed trigger, which is an imported case. We continue with that methodology, that we will be taking certain action sometimes, or in most cases, even before, according to PAHO and WHO general practices, before it becomes necessary to preempt, to make sure that we, as best as possible, stay ahead of the curve. The reality is, folks, that we are one of the last countries in the world to have an imported case of COVID-19. One of the last countries in the world. But like I said, the disease is common to all. The threats and the way it's dealt with is unique to each country. So far, all that we have done shows that we have done the right things. We now need to continue to make sure that we as a people continue to do the right things. And if we as a people continue to do the right things, we as a people will come out of this better than most other nations are coming out of this.
In terms of work at home, in the ministry here, you enforcing that policy?
I personally had discussions with the cabinet secretary. I know with my permanent secretary as well, for them to rapidly begin that process. That process has begun. Each ministry is going to be unique, as is each business, in terms of how rapidly they could potentially get to that phase. But I would say that we are observing, and if quite possibly within the next 24 hours, 36 or 72 hours, we find that process in general happening too slowly, then there is another obvious trigger that we can implement, which is a state of emergency, which necessitates that shutdown. And
Yeah,
we are not afraid to go to that step, but we do believe and we do hope that it is not necessary to do that, but we must maintain, and I am being honest with the population, we must make sure that we have all the tools in the toolbox and that you are all aware of the realities. And I think as a responsible people, we need to do what is necessary ourselves to make sure that it is not necessary for the government to do that, in order to make sure that we do what is necessary for ourselves.
Yeah, but shouldn't the government lead by example here in the ministry?
Yes. And as I said, the government has started that and is doing that. Now, because of, as I said, the various powers, ministries, private sector, everyone now has to, if they haven't accelerated that process, very quickly accelerate that process. Otherwise, we have to take the necessary action. As a health official, it matters not whether the entity that is not practicing social distancing, whether that entity is a private or government entity. We have to ensure.
Much confidence in the minister that the ministry here is doing all they can, frankly.
Well,
it doesn't sound convincing that, I mean, it's not a private entity now, this is the government.
Well, I would say, Hamlet, to respond to that question, if I am not giving you enough confidence that we're doing what's necessary,
when will it happen?
Would you allow me to answer my question? If I am not giving you the confidence, all I can say is, by example and by outcome to date, we have been doing what is necessary. By example and by outcome to date, we are the last country, one of the last countries in the world many of the other countries that you are very familiar with already have COVID-19. So the steps that we are taking are the necessary steps. They may not be happening, as you seem to be implying, fast enough for you personally.
No,
but let me finish answering the question, Hamlet.
Let's not go there.
They are happening as fast as is possible as a nation. And you will see, and you have to admit, that they are happening faster than many first world nations with much greater capabilities than us. And we have stayed ahead of the game. Now, as far as I'm concerned as the Minister of Health, Hamlet, as far as I'm concerned as the Minister of Health, I want this to happen faster than anybody else. But as a responsible individual, part of a collective leadership, I need to understand that sometimes it doesn't happen as fast as I want it to happen. And I would ask you as a responsible individual as well to make that same assumption.
All right, let me just ask a couple questions from the media workers here. Someone is concerned that everybody on the flight with the individual would have been exposed. So what is next?
Well, first of all, for the answer to the question, tell the writer that everybody on the flight would not be exposed. Tell the writer that, yeah? Because, first of all, the COVID-19 is spread by fever, coughing, and sneezing, yeah? The individual were not having those symptoms at that time. So the risk is very minimal. I don't say risk is zero because I'm not God, but the risk is minimal. Secondly, all the epidemiological studies support that you look at and check and have surveillance on everyone within 6 feet of where that individual is sitting. So the writer of the question, tell them that as well. That for epidemiological purposes, only persons sitting within 6 feet of that index case are statistically significant from an epidemiological standpoint.
Right. How many test kits do we have available right now, and how many quarantine centers, and what is the capacity?
We have test kits coming in on a regular basis and also tests going out on a regular basis. So to quote right now exactly how many, I don't know. I know that we continue to ensure that we have enough to deal with the threat, but at the same time, I would expect to see a significant increase, quite likely in testing over the next couple of days as we do the contact tracing, and we already also have a significant increase of test kits coming in, which were ordered, I think, about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago. We expect this week coming close to 1,000 more test kits, 2,000 test kits this week, which was ordered 2 weeks ago, to preempt what, as we have been saying, is quite likely and now regrettably the inevitable, that we have an imported case. So that continues. I would say as we move forward, and we are in a new phase now, in order to allow the efficient flow of communication and to maintain a certain amount of peace of mind of the public, I would expect that right now we'd only come to the public to tell the public of positive tests. Up to today, I think it was important for a ministry to say that we have been testing and all tests were negative. As of today, I think it is important as a ministry and as a people that we concentrate on not the negative test results, but if, God forbid, and most likely possible, positive test results moving forward. So we will be informing now the public of any possible positive tests, but we are not going to be coming forward on a regular basis or so to say how many tests were done and the rest were, or how many negative tests were done now. Because quite honestly, the individuals say I want them to be focusing on the threat and dealing with the contact tracing. We have to date been able to dedicate a significant amount of time to giving you the information that, like which tests, how many tests were sent, when they were sent, what day, etc. and so. Now we are going to be focusing on information of if any of them are positive to tell you as quickly as possible that information.
What about the quarantine centers and their capacity?
There are isolation centers around the island. Well, significantly, there is the isolation center at the General Hospital, and as of today, there is another facility within the compound of the General Hospital that will be ready as of today to take further isolation patients. As we move forward, there is a methodology in terms of who and when an individual does go to an isolation facility. I'll let the doctors explain that.
Right, as we indicated before, quarantine is used to keep people who are exposed, persons who are not symptomatic or they're not ill, and you just want to observe them for 14 days. You use quarantine sites for that. We have a number of them across Grenada for doing something like that. Isolation is used when someone is now sick enough or unwell enough and needs treatment. We now put them into this facility to ensure that they get treatment from healthcare providers, and that's when you use the word isolation. Also, you didn't ask, but because I like explaining things, let me just explain what community transmission is, because it's very important to understand what that means. We are still in the importation phase, where we are currently right now imported our first case. Any case linked to that case where there is a travel history or travel exposure, it is also considered an imported case. Community transmission is when someone shows up with COVID who has had no links whatsoever with a travel history. They have had no links with someone who traveled. They didn't travel themselves, and they don't know how they got the COVID. That's the term when we say community transmission. And that's a very significant thing to understand, because if there's community transmission, it means that you may have missed a lot of other transmissions that you didn't catch before. So we're still in the importation stage, and I want persons to respect this, avoid social gathering, because you really don't want to get to a stage where community transmission starts happening.
Somebody else is asking, will private jets charters continue to operate? And if yes, what is the procedure for arriving crew and passengers apart from people with travel histories from the restricted countries?
The airport is closed to all passenger, commercial passengers. But I do know that there will be, for instance, there's a Pan American Health team coming to assist us that is still coming in today. They plan to leave on Wednesday or Thursday, may stay longer in Grenada. For them to leave, they will need to have a charter aircraft come in to collect them. Our announcement clearly said that the airport will open for medical personnel, and that includes medical equipment when necessary. So you will see, for instance, quite likely on a daily basis, an aircraft land, which is the Regional Security Service aircraft, which is coming to collect our samples to bring it down to Trinidad. You will see some others. For instance, we were trying to get the Cuban nurses into Grenada in a timely manner, and there was a possibility that we had to charter an aircraft for them. But I think it got caught up with all of this other announcement, but to safely say that the contingent of Cuban medical personnel arrived in Grenada last night, are resting at a hotel. They already visited the hospital and met with the staff there, and are ready to begin, when necessary, assisting us as of first thing Monday morning throughout the communities or at the General Hospital with our response to COVID-19. Most of the individuals are nurses with specialties in accident and emergency, or we'd say emergency and ICU. And well, you go ahead and say that there are other specialties, but specific specialties that we expect to have a significant increase in need should there be a significant increase in cases that need medical attention.
I want to add something to get as it relates to the airports and flights. Since our response, every flight request that the airport gets is sent to my desk for me to to decide on the level of risk that flight poses to us. And the final decision on authorization is given by our office. So every flight, every crew, passengers, constantly we're making those decisions every day, assessing the risk, and we have rejected a number of them based on those risks. So that's an added level of support that we give to the airport, and they give to us, as a matter of fact, in our response. So just to be reminded that that's there as well.
The other aspect that we need to be aware of is that I would expect sometime middle of next week or so, all of the United States to close down with respect to air travel. So in terms of emergency items that we need to get in, right now the possible routes, once the US shuts down and the UK shuts down, would actually be from China to Cuba to Grenada, because there are regular flights between China and Cuba, and there are regular flights between Russia and Cuba, and all three of those countries do not have community spread. But we do not have a regular scheduled flight between Grenada and Cuba. So there is a possibility of seeing charter activity, which would be bringing medical personnel, or which would be bringing medical equipment, or whatever we deem necessary, that quite possibly would be coming out of China to Grenada. And I say that specifically to say that as we have been saying before, we have been measuring the risks, and we want to recognize that those countries like China that took the significant actions are now clear. Once we have the discipline to take the relevant actions, we as a people, we too will find ourselves coming out in the clear.
All right, so we need to wrap this up. I need to just ask one quick question of Dr. Martin. Babies exhibiting the symptoms, would it be the same? What should we look for?
Thanks for asking the question regarding babies. With every outbreak, every epidemic, there are some miracles, if you want to call it that way, or unanswered questions. So far, the epidemiology seems to suggest that basically this virus spares babies and children, to be honest. There are reports of very, very minimal numbers of children getting infected. And when you look at the places where children get infected and you look at the population of those places, basically from an epidemiological standpoint, they're not statistical at all. So basically children are spared, and viruses tend to do that. They tend to focus on certain age groups, and I don't know the full answer to this, but it's reassuring to know that our children may not suffer significant from this disease. I don't know if Dr. Mitchell want to speak to what he wants to do going forward in terms of how we address those specific segments of the population.
You would notice that I hardly spoke during this press conference. I'm thinking strategically about what next to be done. Now that we have a confirmed case, all efforts would be made to ensure, and we want to ensure the population, all efforts would be made to ensure that quarantine efforts are hyped up. We want folks to observe the quarantine. We will be putting measures in place to ensure that that happens. We want to ask, and as Minister said earlier on, call on persons to exercise that responsibility, because that is the only way we think that we can stop the spread and the calamity that this disease could possibly bring to our nation. So emphasis will be placed on ensuring this aspect as we enter this phase. And I just want to reiterate that for us as the response team, that is going to be extremely important. And if necessary, we're going to be calling on the powers that be, the RGPF, to ensure that that happens, and happens in a very efficient and effective manner.
Thank you, gentlemen. You have one quick question? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I just want to know, with the limited amount of ventilators that we have, are we going to have one stationing for Carriacou and as well as Maribor side? And secondly, just before you wrap up, I don't think I got everything pertaining to the confirmed case. What flight did the person coming from? Which country did they originate from? Thank you.
thought I'd done all except the flight question. The individual is a Grenadian by birth who lives in the UK and returned to Grenada from the UK. The flight is Virgin. That's the only flight from the UK on Monday. It's Virgin. We are in the process of, we have contacted individuals that are in the various seats close to, so we continue with that. With respect to the ventilators, we have more ventilators per capita now than most of the other countries going into this, but we have seen clearly that each and every one of those countries that have had widespread community infection, no amount of ventilators seem to be enough. As to whether one would get to Karakou or not, that has consistently been discussed. We now have more ventilators, as I've said, but we are constantly having that discussion with respect to the number of people who can actually use ventilators. Not like the oxygen mask. The person has to be intubated, and that's a specialty. So I am leaving that to the healthcare professionals. For me, and I am sure for my sister and for the people of Karakou, they would expect a ventilator up there. I have to let the healthcare professionals decide on that from a medical standpoint.
Yeah, like this has been a really difficult question that we've had to deal with, and obviously the ventilators will be available to Karakou and other places. But what is more important, we've been very clear with our doctors and healthcare providers in Karakou that if any person is sick enough and you suspect COVID, the need for ventilators does not simply jump overnight. It takes a while for that person to get to the point where they need ventilators. Dr. Davis has very clear instructions. Anyone that is sick enough to be hospitalized should be sent to the general hospital immediately, so that there may not be the need for the ventilator on the island, because hopefully they're going to get to the mainland long before the need actually arises for mechanical ventilation. Because to have a ventilator in Karakou means that you have to have the personnel up there to be able to put that person on mechanical ventilation. It's a very highly specialized area of medicine.
Thank you very much. I know you gentlemen are very busy, so you have a minute for wrap-up statements.
Just to say that what we have tried to delay for as long as possible has now happened. So therefore, obviously, we have delayed it for as long as we possibly could. It bought us time. Everything seems to be falling in place at the same time. I would have preferred the one piece of the puzzle of the positive case not to have fallen in place exactly at this time. The Cuban contingency came in last night. The additional ventilators came in on Friday. The General Hospital first facility fully operational. This week, Dr. Mitchell and I went to see it on Wednesday and met with the nurses there. The additional, what I think is about a 10-room facility, will be ready today, the same day that we're making the announcement. What we need to make sure at the same time happens at the right time as well is the discipline of our nation to maintain the social distancing and the end of the irresponsible behavior. It has to end now. We cannot, no member of our society must consider themselves an exception to the rule. No member, regardless of what the occasion is. Birthday, wedding, funeral, anniversary, just long-time friends, or stress. There is no excuse to behave irresponsibly with the threat that we now have and have had as a nation and as a world. So we are all in this together, and to get through, this is not something that only the Ministry of Health and the three of us are the ones to get us through as a nation, or the Prime Minister or the government. It is we as a people collectively are the only ones that can get through this. And it is only if we act together, it is only if we put aside any and all of our differences and act as one. COVID does not respect religious behaviors. COVID does not respect political affiliations. COVID does not respect form of employment. COVID does not respect height, shape, size, color, background. COVID does not respect class, level of income, size of bank account. COVID does not respect any of the things that we choose to differentiate us. In fact, COVID sees all of us as one target. And we have to recognize that in order to defend ourselves, we have to come together as one people, one nation, acting in unison. In order for us to get through this, we have to make sure that we don't make any mistakes. In order for us to fail, only one needs to make the mistake. Only one more party, only one more night in the bar, only one more cruise on a boat, only one more is what's going to put us in trouble. So, those are my closing remarks to you. We will get through this. We have been through other challenges. We knew that this day was most likely going to come, and most of us saw this day as being inevitable. It is now here, but there's also another day that will come, and another day that is inevitable. That is the day that we get through this. That is the day that we can say that we are all clear. That is the day that we can begin to go back to normality. And for us to get to that day as soon as possible, because it is opposite. We wanted to delay this day. We as a people want to accelerate the next inevitable day, which is the day that we get through this. In order for us to accelerate that, we have to act in unison. And we have to have the discipline.
Now is the time for us to focus on eating our bright-colored foods. The pumpkins, the pawpaw, cabbages. Our enzymes need the vitamins and minerals more than ever before. We need the zinc. We need to use our honey, garlic, green bananas. Now is the time to go to the backyard, get those things. It's a perfect time to eat local and buy local, and I'm so happy for that, because we get an opportunity to seriously eat local and buy local. Drink lots of water. I hope that the trade in carbonated beverage goes down. The Ministry of Health is happy for that opportunity. Force people to eat well and sleep as long as you can. This is the time for us to remember what our grandparents used to say to us. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure.
I want to thank everyone who has been supporting the ministry's effort against the fight for COVID-19. We urge you and to continue that fight, continue to support us. We need that support because, as Minister said, it's only together we will defeat and get through this COVID-19 as fast as possible. Thank you.
Just finally, now is the time to support your healthcare worker.
Oh, yes.
Now is the time to not put extra burden on any of them. Now is the time to recognize the sacrifices that they will be making as we move forward. And so now is the time to tell them that you appreciate it. And now is the time to make sure that you don't end up seeing them at the hospital.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you, colleagues, for being here. Before we wrap up, let's just remind you of the helplines: 458-4787, 538-4787. So we just want to thank the Honourable Minister Nicholas Steele for being here, as well as Dr. Francis Martin, the Acting Chief Medical Officer, and Dr. George Mitchell, the COVID-19 Response Coordinator. We thank you all for being here. We also thank our colleagues for being here, those of you who asked your questions via the MWAG chat group, and of course those of you viewing on the channel, on social media, and in the diaspora. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a blessed Sunday.